Michael Ostrolenk here, and I'm with Larry Hagner. He is the author of The Dad's Edge and the founder of the Good Dad Project. How you doing, Larry?
Good. How you doing, Michael?
Fantastic. I, of course, have The Dad's Edge here, which we will talk about shortly. But before we get into the book and the Good Dad Project, your website, and other such things, tell us a little bit about yourself and why fatherhood is so important to you.
Yeah, so I am a father of four. Yeah, four. I'm one of those crazy people.
Nice.
Actually, I just had my fourth son. He is about a month old. And so four boys. I have a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 1-month-old. I've been married now for about 12 years. I've known my wife for about 20 years.
Wow, nice.
And and the reason fatherhood is so important to me is because, to be honest with you, I've been a father now for 10 years. And I can honestly tell you, without any seed of doubt whatsoever, that the first 5 years of my fatherhood journey was terrible.
Huh.
I struggled with it terribly. And I walked in the shoes of a struggling man, a struggling husband, and I really couldn't figure it out. And I like to use this analogy a lot, which is I got my degree in health, so I know everything, about health and wellness and nutrition and all that good stuff. And what fatherhood felt like to me was trying to be an architect every single day. So you study, one subject in school. That's your profession. I've been in the health field now for 16 years, and what fatherhood felt like to me was trying to go build buildings and be an architect every day, which it was completely overwhelming.
Right.
Had a lot of bad days and a lot of crazy learning curves along the way. So I needed to get better at it. So I've been on this mission, this journey now for the past 5 years, which is the Good Dad Project in my book now, The Dad's Edge.
So
Yes,
you said your first 5 years were rough. What happened 5 years and one day in that either switched for you or it slowly transitioned to make it not necessarily easy, but easier? What happened?
Well, so I think a lot of my frustrations really stemmed from my childhood. And my mom was married 3 times. I never really knew my biological father. My mom and my biological father were married for about 5 years. I was born. They got divorced when I was about 9 months old, and he was gone. He basically left the picture. And from the time I was 0 to the time I was 4, there was no father figure in my life. I was raised exclusively by my mom, so I didn't know any different. But my mom then met a man when I was 4. They got married when I was 5. They were married from the time I was 5 to 10. And I can tell you that when he was probably one of the best men I've ever known. He taught me a lot about manners and respect. And he was great, just a great guy. In fact, I always remember people who knew him always speaking so highly of him, except for when he drank.
Oh.
And when he drank, he became a completely different person. Physically abusive, verbally abusive. He beat on me, he beat on my mom. So I kind of got this Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde father figure for those 5 years. And they got divorced when I was 10. And I still, I'm 40, I've never seen him again. And I can tell you, being 10, there was a part of me that was devastated to see him go, and there was a part of me that was relieved to see him go. So that was the father figure I knew for that period of time. When I was 12, something very interesting happened. I had an opportunity to meet my biological father, and which was very interesting. So I had an opportunity to meet him, and I have to tell you, when you're 12 years old and you meet your biological father for the first time, excitement and awkwardness couldn't describe that day more. But we did meet, and my father at the time had been remarried. He had a 2-year-old son, and his wife was pregnant. And a couple months into our relationship, I just remember it started to become really, really strained. And what happened with that is we ended up drifting, and I lost him again. So by the time I was 12, lost my biological father twice, lost my stepfather, who was kind of an abusive person. And I don't share this out of pity, but this goes into why we're here today. For the next several years, my mom remarried a few other men, and they were all pretty much the same as the guy she married when I was 5. So basically, my childhood was a perfect example of, I knew firsthand how devastating it was not having a father around, but I also knew how devastating it was to have a father figure that was toxic. So fast forward till I was 30, I became a father for the first time, and I actually met my biological father again as a total fluke in a coffee shop here in St. Louis. And I'm actually glad to say that this story has a very happy ending. Here we are 10 years later. My father and I actually have a relationship.
Nice.
It's not your typical father-son relationship whatsoever. It's more of a friendship. But I see him often. He sees my kids often. He's still married to the same woman. He's been married for about 37 years. I have 2 half-brothers. And, it is what it is. The past was what it was. And we have a relationship we do now. But what I can tell you is growing up with that type of experience, when I became a father for the first time myself 10 years ago, I had no clue what to do. Absolutely no clue what to do. I just knew what not to do.
Okay.
And I was really stuck in this limbo of, I know I don't want to do these things. I know I'm not going to be mentally, physically abusive. I know I'm not going to do all these bad things. But I don't know what greatness looks like. I have no blueprint for that, and I want to get there. Every bit of me, every piece of me wants to get there, but I don't know how. The Good Dad Project actually, I call the inception of the Good Dad Project my Jerry Maguire moment, because it was, do you remember that movie back in the day? Yeah, so Jerry Maguire, he has this epiphany one night, right, where it's kind of a high point yet a low point, where he decides to forego a lot of his income to give his clients better quality. And he writes an entire mission statement, and we all know how that ends, which he gets fired. So, and it's a severe low point for him. It's devastating to his career. And so 5 years ago, I spent so many days just frustrated with zero patience, zero work-life balance. I just couldn't get out of my head, as far as just really trying to enjoy fatherhood. And I spent a lot of my days just very frustrated and probably not the best person to be around. And one night, we were packing our house because we were getting ready to move. And I'd spent all night packing this one particular room, had boxes, from floor to ceiling, and just got done. Told my 3-year-old son, who is now 8, to please don't go in that room and unpack any of the boxes, because he wanted to get to his toys and that kind of thing. So what happened was, I came back about 20 minutes later, and everything that I had packed up was scattered everywhere. And I got very angry. And what I did was, I took him and I spanked him. And I spanked him hard, and I was mad. Now, some people are in the camp where, hey, spanking's fine, and some people are not. And I can tell you that I'm not a fan of it, because I was hit as a child myself. So my wife came to me and she's like, he's 3. You know that, right? He's 3. And I could tell she was disappointed. I had hurt my child, and I was disappointed myself. And I went into my office, and I went in, and I just got in front of my computer. I just wanted to distract myself from what had just happened. Got on Facebook, and in the sidebar, I saw create a page. And I was emotional, and I was upset, and it's kind of like that Jerry Maguire moment where he's up late writing his mission statement. And I basically told myself, if I don't get this part of my life figured out, I'm going to lose my wife, because my marriage was in trouble at the time as well, because I just didn't have the right mindset. I'm going to lose my kids. So I better get this under control. And what better way to do it than to open myself up and just become a student of it. And just like anything else, I was trained in health. Why not just open that part of my life up and be like, I don't have this all figured out. I just want to learn. So I started a page called the Good Dad Project. And I don't know how many people know this, but the Good Dad Project was actually me. I was the project. I was the Good Dad Project.
That's cool. Nice.
And what I noticed was, over the past 5 years now, is the Good Dad Project has now turned into this just giant mission. And we've got a huge community. And we've got a top-rated podcast, and The Dad's Edge is a best-selling book. And I don't say those things out of like, hey, look at me and what we're doing in the accolades, but I didn't realize how many men were in the same camp as I was when it came to all these struggles and the things that we struggle with most, until I started openly sharing the vulnerability that was behind it. And that's really what the Good Dad Project is. It's a podcast, it's a book, it's a blog. I do speaking events as well, and it's really just a group of, to be honest with you, just imperfect, knuckleheaded fathers that just want to learn from each other. That's really what it is.
Tell us a little bit about some of the blog posts, some of the more popular blog posts, as well as some of the guests you've had on your podcasts.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
As well as some of the guests you've had on your podcast.
What were some of the most popular ones?
Well, two things. So, what some of your more popular blog posts, topically, and also who are some of the guests you've had on your podcast?
Sure. So the most popular blog posts that we've had are we actually have several guest bloggers at this point, and I can tell you this: the more raw and the more vulnerable these blog posts are, the more popular they are. So what I have found is that no man or no reader relates to perfection or just shared tips with me. They want to know, what's your story, what's your struggle, how did you get through it? Because that's how I learn. To answer your question, I wrote a blog post a couple years ago called Patience, A Dad's Confessions. And that blog post probably became one of our most popular. And it was really just me kind of spilling my guts about how I had none. And how I was trying to strive to get more.
You weren't box breathing back then, huh?
I was. Now I've learned to box breathe, so it's been a lot better. But and as far as the guests go, we're now at 52 episodes that we've released, and the podcast downloads are in the six figures. And looking at all the shows that we've done, I can tell you that the content that speaks the loudest volumes to men are. So we had a mutual friend on that you and I know, Mark Devine, Navy SEAL. He was fantastic, and I can tell you that men garnered a lot from that particular episode.
Excellent.
As well as we've had a lot of UFC fighters.
Oh, cool!
Recently come on. We've had Carlos Condit. We've had Charlie the Spaniard Brenneman, Jim Miller, who actually just fought in UFC 196, and we're now going to interview Frankie Edgar as well. And what I'm finding is no matter fame or fortune or who these people are, all of them are so eager to talk about fatherhood. And one other area I can tell you, we also had Dan Miller on, who is a New York Times bestselling author of 48 Days to the Work You Love. Most men really want to know, how do I find passion and purpose in what I do for a living? Can those two worlds collide? And Dan was great on that episode, and anytime we have content around work-life balance or pursuing your passion, it seems to speak volumes to men.
Let's jump from kind of the more personal level to the cultural level, and I'm curious on your take on kind of the various cultural phenomenons where it seems like there are less married couples, less fathers in the homes, especially in certain communities, and it seems like there are some groups of people who express the revelation that there's no need really even for men in the home. And I'm not taking away from gay families and all that kind of stuff, but let's just stick to heterosexual couples at this time. Talk to me what you see as various cultural things that are happening, positive and negative, and where we are, where we're going, and where we've been in terms of fatherhood.
So I can tell you the variety of situations like that, and it seems to be growing. As far as like, for instance, I'll use the example of one of the most popular things that most men I find want to hear about are the blended families. So with a divorce rate in the U.S. of almost 50%, that also gives leeway to that there's going to be 50% of perhaps men who listen to our show or even your show that might be in a blended family situation where they're a step parent, or what we've heard in the past, bonus parents or bonus kids. We've seen that. Most of the emails that I get are from men who are in those blended families who want to know, hey, what are my boundaries, and how can I be a father without overstepping my boundaries, or how can I be the best dad I can without thinking these kids I'm taking their father away from them, or in a situation like mine where these kids are basically left and they don't know who their biological father is, or they have no relationship. How do I mend the fences with this child, to show up as best I can? Like, how do I do that when they're not necessarily mine, but they are?
One thing I like to ask you about is pop culture. On occasion, because we have nieces and nephews, we watch the Disney Channel, and it seems to me that the way they portray men is very damaging to men and to families. And I'm wondering if you've ever watched the Disney Channel. And it doesn't have to be the Disney Channel, but it just seems like they portray a lot of these television shows, kids is smart and sassy and they know it all, and the fathers are kind of dumb and silly, and the mothers tend to be the friends of the kids. And I'm wondering if you've noticed that, and if so, what kind of effect you think it might have on the culture at large, and fathers in particular.
That's a good question, because we've heard this theme come up a lot, and it's something that we haven't had an opportunity to talk about very much, but I can tell you it's very real out there, exactly what you're seeing. So, or the Al Bundys of the world,
okay,
where the dad doesn't do anything, and he's kind of dumb, and the mom really runs the show, and I can tell you, men do not appreciate being viewed in that type of light whatsoever, and we've heard that theme over and over again. What I think we're seeing now, though, with the online world is we're seeing more and more masculinity step up versus, like, for instance, I know Ryan Mickler was on Mark Devine's podcast. Ryan Mickler is the founder of a site called Order of Man, which it's all about everything that you just described. It's the exact opposite of that. So how do you show up in the world as a man with masculinity? How do you do that in a world that portrays men maybe in a different light? So I can guarantee you that in my house, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners on the GDP as well, we have this theme that we do not show up that way, that we show up with a tremendous amount of purpose and engagement, and and we're not morons.
Not most of the time, right?
Right, not most of the time. But I can definitely tell you that theme we're hearing more and more.
Good to hear. You mentioned masculinity, and I'm wondering what your take, how you would define masculinity, and how you might define masculinity now. And I'm thinking more of an integrated way, 'cause having followed your work and having spent some time with you and talked to you at SealFit HQ. How do you define masculinity? And talk to me about kind of both compassion and strength and courage and kind of different words that some might fall more, at least conventionally, into the masculine camp. Some might fall more into the feminine camp. And how do you see those playing out in fatherhood and in relationships, period?
That's a really good question. We could probably do an entire show on that.
Yep.
I'll try to surmise what I think my view of it is, and I can tell you this is from a view that was raised probably from a very poor father figure, and I don't mean poor as a materialistic. I mean a poor example of how a man should be to his wife, how a man should be to his kids, and what I can tell you is I think you need to be a very good blend of both. And I'm not talking about metrosexuality or anything like that, where I think of like the guys who wax their eyebrows and shave their bodies from head to toe and all that good stuff, and they're what I'm talking about is I think that there is a fine line between you have to be affectionate with your kids and you have to be emotionally vested in that relationship, and you have to be very, very comfortable with giving your kid a hug and a kiss, and even though you're a dad, that's okay. You should do those things. But I think that there's also, you need to teach your kids grit. You need to teach them perseverance. You can't be the soft, fluffy father a lot. You have to, they have to have an example of, I need to know what emotional stability looks like. I need to know what affection looks like. But also, hey, teach me to be a little tough, too, because I need to know those lessons as I grow up and I move forward. I think my wife and I are a good blend of, my wife's a very strong woman, but I think she's a good blend of, like, when there's a deep emotional need, either one of us can go tend to our kids, but I think they want to lean towards her, and then when they need just that little bit of grit, maybe they come towards me. But I think it's, to answer your question, it's definitely a good mixture of both. I don't think you should be overbearingly masculine to your kids to the point where there's no affection and all you do is teach them to be tough men or tough women. But I think there's also a boundary there where you can be too soft. And you have to teach both.
Let's go back out to the 30,000-foot view again and look at the culture. And I'm curious on your take on Triple Near calls it the new man. kind of integrating what you just suggested, the kind of the more feminine and the masculine. But where are we as a culture? Because it seems to me that masculinity is constantly under attack. Both the kind of the version you describe, which is more the tough, gritty side, which has no compassion and care necessarily expressively, but just masculinity in general. And I'm wondering what your take is on that in terms of pop culture and such.
So I look back about 5 to 10 years ago when it seemed like that masculinity was lost a little bit. To be honest with you, we saw more of that. I think softer, maybe metro type of a male person, in everyday life. And I think if you look back over the past 18 months, there's been more now of a emphasis on being a man, and men growing their beards again. Gillette, I think, reported just terrible earnings, over the past year because there's a lot of men now who don't shave, and so you can tell that there's definitely that men are leaning more towards the side of masculinity. If you go online, I mean, there's more sites, there's more organizations that really that really, what's the word I'm looking for? Really emphasize that in a man, being that masculine person. So I think we're right now we're seeing a shift.
With your background in health, and I know I've seen you at SealFit and such, I'm curious on your take as a cultural phenomenon. CrossFit, SealFit, these adventure races.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Can you not hear me?
Yeah, but it got broke. It was breaking up really bad.
Okay. Oh.
I turned my video off just to help see if it would help stream it.
Okay. So as a cultural phenomenon, I'm thinking like CrossFit, SealFit, the various adventure races, very masculine in orientation. And I wonder if that fits in with your idea and ideals around, the changing mood around masculinity the past couple of years versus the last decade or two.
Yeah, I think it definitely does. I mean, if I look at Spartan races, if I look at Tough Mudders, if you look at SealFit, you look at Kokoro Camp, I believe they have the Agogi now as well, which is similar to Kokoro Camp. But again, I think we're seeing that shift in the physicality of men wanting to test their limits, and women too.
Yep.
But we're talking about men, and there is that we see that actually a lot, and that seems to be, as I look online at other organizations where they really preach masculinity, I can see that, because a lot of these guys, like for instance, I'll reference Ryan Mickler, who's the founder of Order of Man. He does these men retreats, and he tries to schedule them around a Spartan race, where all these men can get together, have a retreat, and then in the middle of the retreat, they do this Spartan race all together, and it's team. They're getting ready to do this Agogi as well, where they go for 60 hours, and I think they replicate something similar to Mark's Kokoro Camp.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely think we're seeing a shift in how men want to test their physical limits. And as for me, daily activity, it's not an option in my life. In other words, I am doing something active every single day. And to be honest with you, I will get my kids involved in it. And I don't mean that as like a punishment. Hey, like we're going out, we're running 2 miles. It's more, hey, let's go out and do this because it's good for us. It's good for our minds. It's good for our spirit. It's good for our bodies. And let's do it together. So that's how we do it in my house. And I can tell you by talking to some of our other guests who have come on the show that it's very similar in other homes that we've seen. That it's more this mentality of this team thing that they do it all together.
Nice. I want to put out there too, besides CrossFit, SealFit, Spartan races, Tough Mudders, and such, very masculine-oriented adventures and challenges and crucibles, there's also the growing utilization of things like yoga and meditation, which also seemingly benefit the softer side of masculinity, or maybe the feminine side. And it seems like as you bring all these things together, it's very useful for the kind of man that you are describing, someone who lives in that, on the edge of strength and courage and power, but also has an open and caring and compassionate heart.
I totally agree, and I used to think yoga was a bit of a soft type of exercise, and now that I've been doing it, it is not.
Oh, no.
It's a very, very tough workout, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally. Yoga can really tap into some deep levels that you have, and really gets the mind right. And we actually here in St. Louis, the gym that's down the street from me, I'm guessing that they're really getting that as well because they have a kids yoga class.
Cool.
And my kids, they actually want to sign up for the next session. I don't think they've ever seen yoga, but they're very intrigued by it, which I think, hey, why not? They're 10 and 8. And what better time in their lives to go, hey, yeah, absolutely, let's go check this out.
That's awesome. Larry, you have a book, The Dad's Edge, 9 Simple Ways to Have Unlimited Patience, Improve Relationships, and Positive Lasting Memories. First, where can folks find out about your book? And also, where can people find your website?
You can find out anything that we're doing on gooddadproject.com. And that's where you'll find the blog, the podcast. If you go to gooddadproject.com/podcast, that's where all of our podcast episodes are. The book is on there as well. It's in the resources. So you can also find the book, though, on Amazon, and you can find it on iTunes and on Kindle. I'm humbled by it. To be honest with you, when I first launched the book back in October, I thought, I was like, man, I really hope it's within like the top 1,000, of fatherhood. And last week it hit number 2.
Oh, congratulations!
So thank you. It's been, but 10 days into it, it hit the top 10 within the first 10 days. So it's been a great success, and I'll share why I think it's become a good success, and that's because when I first started on my fatherhood journey of improvement 5 years ago, anything that I could read about it, I was reading about it. The thing that I couldn't relate to is a lot of the books that I read, I felt like it was written by people with, who had a lot of accolades behind their name, and it was situational parenting, and I almost felt like I was being talked down to, in the book. And so when I wrote my own book, I wanted it to be from one dad to another, from just one busy dad to another who's just trying to figure it out. And the book is really written with that voice of like, hey, I'm in the trenches with you. Like, I am not writing this book from a pedestal. I've screwed up so many times. I've even mentioned in the book how many times I've screwed up and what I've done, and why I've made some of the choices I have. And I think that's what resonates with men is like, don't tell me about the perfection of parenting because it doesn't exist. Tell me about how you got through a struggle or how you get through this certain mentality. You just show me the pathway to do that. And I think that's what really relates to men. I know I relate to that as well. We've heard the analogy too of, I grew up with the wrestlers, Mr. Wonderful and Mr. Perfect. And those two guys were like the most hated guys in wrestling. And it's because no one can relate to perfection. They relate to everyday, raw, real life.
Right. Well, Larry, thanks for joining me. I definitely encourage folks to check out the Good Dad Project and your book, The Dad's Edge. And Larry, I look forward to seeing you hopefully sometime soon at HQ.
Sounds great. Thanks again for having me on.
All right, take care.